Thank you very much. I enjoyed very much my trip here by train, and enjoyed coming to Milwaukee. I haven't really spoke on economics until some years ago, like in the early 70s. I spoke to a college group here at the behest of Judge Board, and was coming here to meet him, and also met some other friends of my sister-in-law. So it's kind of interesting coming to Wisconsin and going through this. But what I want to talk about tonight is the Austrian system, and I want to talk about the book to some extent, how the book came about. And at the end, the title of the book was "It Didn't Have to Be This Way." In other words, these are not things that are set in stone, but they are things that came about because of human decisions. But can all of you hear me? Is it okay? Okay, if you can, okay, I'll try to get close. So, if next slide, if you would. I want to tell you a little bit of the story of how the book was written. That's the book. That's a picture of Detroit. And we say it didn't have to be this way. If you want to see, I gave the Philadelphia Society, which I'm a member, a little closer, I guess. Pull this out. Is that okay? You can hear me? Yeah. Okay. So, in any event, people ask me, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Sterling Heights. Well, where's that? It's 20 miles from where Detroit used to be. And I suggested to the Philadelphia Society, I said, I think you should have a conference on liberalism and hold it in Detroit. They are going to have that conference, but they decided to go to Grand Rapids, which still exists. Okay, but in any event, coming down to it, the whole thing, when I was asked to write the book, it was supposed to be a small pamphlet. Intercollegiate Studies Institute came to me and said, would you write a book on Austrian economics? Now, I had studied Austrian economics as a student at U of D back in 1961, and we had an Austrian department. And Father Steiner, who was on the board of FEE, was a Jesuit who was on the board of FEE, good friends with Leonard Reed, had pretty much filled the library with wonderful books so that anything we needed was there. And I wrote my bachelor's thesis on the Austrian school. Now, it's very interesting when we get into the Austrian school, and I'm writing the book. It's 2006, they gave me the contract. And in 2007, there were all the indications that we were going to have some fun in the economy, that this Austrian theory was going to prove itself, that the whole trade cycle theory was going to prove itself. All the indications were there. I had seen it. I was in the metal stamping business and decided to sell at that time because of what I saw in the Austrian school, and I was able to save my own fortune, it's as small as it is, but able to save it and a lot of my friends by following the Austrian school. So I've had very practical experience in that. I knew I met Leonard Reed, I met a lot of the Austrians when I was a college boy going to the seminar. So it was a lot of fun to read, and I knew the mess was coming. And so I said to my editor, I said, look, let's not push this thing, because we're going to go into a very, very severe part of the economy. It's going to prove the Austrian school, and it's going to really enhance the book. Now, if you take a look at what happened, and I printed this out, and I'm going to leave a copy of the flash drive, not the flash drive, but the program with Aaron, and if you want it, you're welcome to it. So you're welcome to the program, because you may want to check some of the things. But if you take a look at it, there were four causes that caused it. And of course, number one was the expansion by the Federal Reserve Board. Not only by the Federal Reserve Board, but by the central banks across the entire world. The housing bubble wasn't America only. It was in Ireland, it was in Spain, it was in Italy, it was in France. And it was done with the cooperation of all the central banks, lowering the reserve requirements on real estate, and thus inflating the currency for real estate and pushing up the prices. Okay? And that was an evident thing. That was done by them. The second thing that did it was the use of mathematics, which the Austrians really are very uncomfortable with, because they don't believe that human beings can be put into mathematical equations, nor can you do investments on a large scale based upon statistical analysis. The statistics is history. And what we found out is that I had one dean of the school where I was teaching. He said, we've got to teach financial engineering, I said, what's that? And he said, oh, it's where we take all these sort of dicey investments, put them all together, and with statistical analysis, we can sell AAA rated bonds. I told him, I said, Rod, I said, you're going to cheat a lot of little old ladies out of their money. Because my grandmother went to the 4th grade, told me you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And what was happening was they were selling this stuff all over the world. And why was it important for them to get AAA rated bonds? Because of the fact, legally, pension funds and other groups across the world cannot buy bonds unless they're AAA rated. So they were using these mathematical sleight of hands to do that, and hence building the house of cards which later came down. A number of books have been written on this. In my book, I refer to a number of them that talk about this. The next thing is, of course, the government intervention forcing the housing market. Now, we've had this in Detroit twice. We had it during the Nixon administration, when the then Governor Romney decided that what we got to do is we can end this poverty problem if people will own property. So he put through a bill under Nixon that the people could use welfare payments as income to buy houses. And of course, who would guarantee the loans for the banks? The federal government, you and I. Okay, and so what happened was anybody with any sense immediately sold their houses in Detroit, and the banks were glad to finance the deal. But what they didn't understand is that it isn't property that makes character; it's character that makes property. Okay, and if you give people property and there's no character, they'll strip the houses of all the valuable things and move on to the next one. So that was the first instance we had of that. Then the Clinton administration and then the Bush administration decided that the way to solve the problems, the social problems in the United States was to do what? Was to increase home ownership. And they had all kinds of rules. Friends of mine who were in the banking business were told, if you don't follow this Community Investment Act, we won't give you permission to have branches. So they were forcing it on one hand with the cheap credit and totally ignoring the whole concept of character in making loans, totally ignoring any sound finance, and pushing on the other hand with government regulation to push this thing to happen. And it was a tremendous ignoring of the free market process. It was a bizarre notion. And then the last thing we did, which I think is going to come to have a problem, is too big to fail. Now, one of the important things about any organization is you got to build firewalls. In other words, you have to have firewalls in case something goes wrong. The larger the organization and the more chance you have of a mistake, the more dangerous the mistake will be. And I think building these too big to fail banks may have a major problem. I would give that a prediction in that. So these were the four things. And we had to analyze each one of these in terms of the Austrian school. Okay, next slide, please. So I entitled the talk, okay, my talk tonight, okay, a crisis, a school, and a book. This was the book about it. Now, I just want to read this to you. This stuff started to appear in the Financial Times and other places. And I'll ask you to guess who said this stuff. There were soul searching over the failure of economics and the recent crisis. Such failures are not evident in two areas, or most evident in two areas. The inadequacies of the efficient market hypothesis, the bedrock of modern financial economics, and the irrelevance of macroeconomic theory. Their theories prove virtually useless in anticipating the crisis, in analyzing its development, and in recommending measures to deal with it. Who do you think said that? A fellow in a cave who's heading up an institute by George Soros to reform economics. Now here's the guy who's pushing this. Take a look at the next quote. The past 30 years of macroeconomic training of American and British universities were a costly waste of time. Paul Krugman said that. The mainstream itself is not confident of its own theories and systems. Okay, next slide, please. Okay? This is the direct quote from, to the uninitiated, economics has always been a dismal science. I can tell you that. I walk into class to teach, and I say, how many of you had economics before? Well, half the class go up, hands go up. How many of you hated it? Same hands go up. I said, why'd you hate it? We didn't learn it. Well, what was it? It was all graphs and charts, and we don't remember a thing. So when I hired teachers, and I had to hire 20 of them, I said, look, you got to explain this stuff in English. If you do the math, the kids won't remember a thing. They'll walk out, they won't have anything. They'll remember a story, but they won't remember a graph. If you give them the story first, they'll recreate the graph. But if you give them the graph first, they won't be able to recreate the story. Okay, it says, from Bradley Long of the University, the attacks come from within the guild. From Bradley Long, University of California, Berkeley, Paul Krugman of Princeton and the New York Times, William Butler of the London Schools of Economics, respectively. The macroeconomic crisis in the past 2 years is provoking a crisis in macroeconomics. In this last year of the Robbins lectures at LSC, Krugman feared that most macroeconomics of the past 30 years was spectacularly useless at best and positively harmless at worst. Now somebody read that to him because he's practicing it now. Okay? These internal critics argue that economists missed the origins of the crisis, failed to appreciate its worst symptoms, and could not agree about the cure. In other words, economists misread the economy on the way out and missed it on the way down, and now cannot get it right. And that's their quote. Next slide, please. So there's clearly a difference. Approach has to be done. One that can explain the crisis, can see it coming, and has a cure. And that is the Austrian school. Because most of the Austrians that I talked to knew this thing was coming. They can explain it, and there is a cure, which we'll go into. Next slide. Okay, I want to go into the roots of the Austrian school, because the roots go back to Aristotle. And it's amazing to me that in our educational system, it isn't what we teach, it's what we don't tell people. Okay? When I was going through, a friend of mine said we were going through Aristotle's works. He said, you know, Aristotle's the gold standard. He was a big defender of private property. He said, why have I never heard this before? But when you go into the original works, you find out that Aristotle traces it back, and you find out that the leaders of the Austrian school look back to Aristotle and to St. Thomas Aquinas for a good deal of their inspiration. Now, it starts in the Lyceum, which was Aristotle's academy in Athens, in which he taught, especially in his book, The Politics. He mentioned these things, talked about the whole concept of private property and the individual rights. Okay, it then moved to the University of Paris, where Thomas Aquinas taught, and we'll talk a little bit about his contribution. And then to the University of Salamanca in Spain, about 1500. Now, it's about, Lyceum is about 300 years before Christ. The University of Paris is around 1250, and the University of Salamanca is around 1500. Those are the roots of the school. Okay, next slide. Okay, now it moves because of the paper hanger, our friend Adolf Hitler. It moves from Vienna. There's a picture of the University of Vienna. And Mises comes to New York University with the help of Henry Hazlitt, where he starts teaching. Leonard Reed, who really is, I think, the entrepreneur of the whole libertarian movement. He was the guy who in 1946 and 47 established the, and he was the only place where you could get, when I was in college, besides the University of Detroit Library, was the only place where you could actually get the physical works. You could actually, he was actually printing works that were not available in bookstores or any other place. And he organized around the country. Intercollegiate Studies Institute, who published my book, is an offshoot of FEE. So there's an enormous effect that Leonard Reed had. And then now it has now moved to Auburn, Alabama, at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and where that's one of the centers of it. But there are a number of centers. Acton Institute is a center. Hillsdale College is a center. University of Detroit Mercy, about half of our department is a center. Okay, Northwood University is a center, and there are dozens. Literally, when I go through, there are hundreds of people who are teaching at universities, teaching Austrian economics. Personally, get a pat in the back. I have trained at least 50 teachers, now teaching at 26 different schools of higher learning. And I'm not the only one. There are dozens of us doing this. So this is becoming something that's going to come to the surface very quickly. Okay, it all begins with Aristotle, probably the most significant figure in Western intellectual civilization. There's a new book written, I would recommend it to you. It's called The Cave and the Light. And it's really the competition between Aristotle and Plato. Plato's really had a lot of wonderful things to say, but his utopian ideas puts him on the other side. And Aristotle was on the other side of that. And when you read him, he criticizes Plato, even though Plato was his mentor. He defends private property and limited government. And he writes books on biology, logic, metaphysics, psychology, etc. Actually founded the science of biology, founded the science of logic. He probably was a true polymath. Okay, next question. Now, when the Roman Empire collapsed, the works of Aristotle were lost, except in the East. And only the monks, really copying the works, copied them down, and we have them. But in the East, in the Byzantine Empire, and among the Arab scholars, the works of Aristotle were kept. Thomas Aquinas brought those back after about 750 years. We owe to St. Thomas the bringing of Aristotelian logic back. Okay? He defends private property and profits, and he sees economic value as subjective. In other words, he believed in what? The subjective theory of value as opposed to the labor theory of value. In addition, his defense of the individual intellect is a metaphysical basis of individual rights. That each one of us is specially gifted, okay? And we are created the same way God created Adam and Eve, directly. The soul is a direct creation of God, not coming from some material forces. And he defends the dignity and freedom of the human person. The school of Salamanca, of which we'll talk about in a minute, directly takes his teachings and applies it to social theory and economic theory. Next question. Okay, the school of Salamanca. Both Joseph Schumpeter and Hayek credit the school of Salamanca. They say that's where modern economics started. Now, it's very interesting. There was a Mount Pelerin meeting in Spain, and Hayek insisted on taking everybody to Salamanca, and he took them into classrooms. He said, look, fellas, this is where it all began. It was in Salamanca. They applied the teachings of Aquinas to political and economic questions. They developed a monetary theory, condemned inflation. By the way, they told the king of Spain that if you take the coins and you melt them down, it's a mortal sin, and you go to hell for that. So the Spanish government was a little bit nervous about inflating the currency. I kind of wish our present government would listen to that. Okay. They opted for free trade, believed in free trade, developed a relatively large economic defense of free trade and monetary theory. And they were the ones that convinced the Pope to condemn slavery in the New World. They're defending the rights of native peoples. The University of Salamanca was sort of the beacon. It was the fee of the time. Okay, the school prefigures the Austrians. Okay, now this comes from the History of Economic Thought book that I had as a student at U of D under Dr. Hoffman, John Bell. I later met his son, and he wrote this book on the history of economic thought. And here's what he said about the Austrians. Certainly no group added so much to the pure body of economic theory as did the Austrians. The intellectual depth of all economists, the body of doctrines developed in the years 1871 to 1889 by the Austrian economists is great. Their contributions provide some of the strongest work threads in the garment of economic theory. Now, it's very interesting. As I took courses in microeconomics and macroeconomics and whatever else, I said, hey, wait a minute. The basis of these ideas is Austrian. It's been mathematicized when it came through Cambridge. But the ideas are Austrian. And I'm going to go through it and explain each one where that stuff came from. Modern economists don't know their roots. And what they're mainly teaching is ideas developed by the Austrians. Okay, Karl Menger, the founder of the school, he actually started out with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, And he established the principle of subjective value and capital structure. He revolutionized economics. And Alfred Marshall, okay, the premier economist in England, in the appendix to his book, says, they, the Austrians, Bauer, Menger, and Veryser, are the people that I took. And then, what Marshall did in the appendix is he mathematicized it. And then he said, burn the mathematics. Okay, I have the citation in my book. But he said it came from that. The whole concept came from that. Okay? Now what they've done is they've made so much math that it's ununderstandable. But this is where it came from. Okay? Menger was the, unfortunately, his mentor, or mentee, who was scheduled to be the Emperor of Austria, unfortunately committed suicide over a love incident. But he was tutoring the heir of the throne. Okay, and he laid the basis. Now his associate, now notice they all have phones. Mainly these guys are aristocrats of the old school. Laid the foundation in Bauer for price, interest, and capital theory based on Menger. Okay, and he provides one of the best refutations of the labor theory of value. He is best known for time theory of interest. By the way, that's the basis of all financial courses today, time theory of interest. It goes back not to Keynes, not to England, it goes back to von Bauer. Okay? He died just before World War I started. Hopefully, other than we'll talk to the Austrians as they get into that. Okay, next slide. His associate, von Veryser, died in 26. His whole concept of cost as alternative value is one of the most important contributions. And it was from there that Mises took his idea that socialism could not work without prices. And he explained how a socialist economy, using the concept of opportunity cost, would have some very, very difficult times. It was Hayek, who was his student, who took that idea, and Mises, who then gave their criticisms of socialist economics. Okay, a very important figure. His books are a little bit difficult to get hold of. This one's in German. I was able to get English versions. Thank God that Mises is reprinting this stuff, so it'll be available to scholars. Next slide. Okay. Frank Vedder, an American Austrian. He studied in Germany, picked it up. Without Vedder, there would be no good science of finance. He was the fellow who came up with time value of money and interest rates. And these are essential to the operations of stock and securities markets. He's one of the first American Austrians, and he explained how the amount of bank credit being pushed into the economy has this distortion effect. He understood, and we're going to go into the distortion effect that we're seeing now. Okay. Next slide. Okay, von Mises, a monumental figure. I mean, I could spend the whole evening going through the contributions of Ludwig von Mises. Absolutely astounding in life. He's truly the dean of the school, especially in the United States. Thank God he was able to get out of Austria. I think he was the night before, whatever, he knew the Nazis were coming, and they got his library, got his stuff, but he was able to escape. And it was brought to the United States, and where he continued his work. By the way, Mises was never hired full-time at the university, and Hayek wasn't. They were adjunct professors, because the economics establishment did not accept them. Okay, so a lot of times when you're on the margins, it thinks you have more effect than if you're in the middle of it. Okay? Von Hayek is best known for the trade cycle and information theory. He predicted the fall of the Soviet Union on the basis that there was not enough information for them to run the thing. And I'm now reading some of the work of Gorbachev, and Gorbachev's complaining about that. In his book, he says there's something wrong with our economy. You know, we're making all these tires and we have no wheels, and we have all these gears that don't fit into that transmission, and we don't know how to put it together. Hayek said that that would happen. He said they don't have the information. The further up the tree, the less information you have. And Hayek said the information is best done what? At the impact of the action. They know what's going on. And I tell students, I said, I know what's going on. I have it in class. The chairman of the department, they know a little bit about you. The dean doesn't know anything about you. The president doesn't know you exist. And the superintendent of education in Michigan doesn't care. Okay? And what happens is this, is that the larger the organization gets, the more prone it is to mistakes, and big ones. Give you an example. In World War I, there were 500,000 Americans died in the United States. There was 100,000 boys killed at the front. 5 times the number of people died in the United States in World War I as were actually killed in the trenches. And they never left here. Why? Because the big organization did not recognize that a flu epidemic broke out in the camp in Kansas. And the big organization had no concept of what they were doing, sent those boys overseas, and they infected the world. 50 million people died from that flu epidemic. If some of you asked to go back in your families, I know in my family, there are incidents of it. Okay? Why? Because the big organization at the top didn't know what the doctor in Kansas knew. Okay? And so the problem is with the big organizations, and that's why I think this too big to fail is going to be a problem. Why? Because there's no firewalls. And this was Hayek's position on that. A very important concept. It's in our Constitution, in Amendment 10, that law. It should be enforced by the courts. Which should be, the local government should not be usurped by federal government. And one of the popes in 1931, Pius XI, wrote very strongly in favor of the concept of subsidiarity, that things should be left at the family level, the local level, etc. Why? One of the reasons is you know what's going on. The other reason is there's firewalls. Okay? Mises took a little bit different tack. He said socialism's going to fail because there aren't any prices. Now think of it. Let's say you were the buyer for General Motors, and you had to replace all of the parts that are needed, right? Because General Motors has to keep a whole warehouse full of parts for every car they make. How would you know which ones to make? The price tells you. The price tells you that you better have enough hubcaps for a 1979 Chevy, because the price will tell you that. And maybe you don't need them for a 1978 Chevy, because prices tell you what to do. And they also tell you, and I explain this to my students, when you go into a department store, everything is in dollars, which gives you the ability to compare. Right? You can say, well, if I buy this sofa, I can't go to Florida. If I do this, I can't do that. It sets up the whole concept of alternative cost. And the problem with socialism, according to Mises, they don't know the alternatives. They don't know whether they're wasting resources or whether they're using them properly without a price system. And both men said, for that reason, this thing is not going to work. Okay? If you go on the internet or whatever, it's between Keynes and Hayek, the men were friends. They and their wives had dinner together. Hayek and Keynes got together quite often. Hayek wrote a very critical review of Keynes' theory on money. And in some sense, and in my book, wherever I could use a non-Austrian to back my point up, I did. And the irony is when you read these original works, these guys recognize it. Keynes recognized that mathematics doesn't work. He also recognized that infusions of money and credit into an economy create distortions. I mean, you have to understand, if you read my book, you buy it, you're going to see all these ironies. And there are tremendous ironies in this thing that really are not reported in the press. Keynes, unfortunately, approached everything from the big picture. He did not understand what happens in an economy and thought that the adjustments could be made from the top. Rothbard, probably one of the finest historians of the trade cycle. His work changed the entire idea of what happened in 1929. And did a magnificent job of doing that. He also wrote a book in 1819 on the Panic of 1819. Murray was a superb historian. And His work, I think, will become more and more recognized, especially his historical work. Most of Man Economy in the State is really explaining human action. Okay, Murray differed a little bit. Murray called himself a Thomist. I knew Murray. He taught at St. Thomas on his epistemology. He disagreed a little bit with Mises on that. But was a superb historian and totally a man dedicated to the truth. Sometimes he said things you didn't like, but he believed it was true. He wouldn't tell you the opposite. Next slide. Okay. Hazlitt, he brought the Austrian school to the United States. He took Mises in. He got Mises a job. He got an apartment. He met him at the bowl. Hazlitt was one of the few Americans who had actually read Mises' work. He was an astounding communicator. His Economics in One Lesson is probably the best introduction published. And I make sure that all of my students read it. And it's funny, I have a whole class of Chinese students, and I have them reading Economics in One Lesson. And they did it in Chinese because it's available through Hong Kong. And they did it in America. They don't have the Chinese government stopping their internet. So what they do is they go to Hong Kong and get the Chinese version. And it's surprising. They come out very well on the test. Minimum wage and the rest of it. No, their understanding has them. Of course, it's available, I think, most of the major languages in the world. He popularized the school. And if you'll notice, one thing about Austrian economics, notice the dates of how long these people lived. I told my doc that. He said, you know, doc, I've been living a long time. He said, how do you know that? I said, well, I'm an Austrian economist. Okay, but 99 is the guy. The next slide. Okay, a very substantial figure. Trade in England, knew John Maynard Keynes. I met him at the Philadelphia Society meeting. His book on idle resources and the Keynesian episode. I had one boy who was a leftist who read that. His name is Paul Blue. He later went to work, switched entirely because of Hutt's work on Keynes. And now is the chief economist for Dun & Bradstreet. But Hutt's book is really substantial. He criticized Keynes. He knew the weaknesses in Keynes. He understood the whole theory of money. He explored Say's law. He was not real happy with labor unions. I guess that's becoming a thing that both Michigan and Wisconsin are sharing. He talked about the strike threat system and how it distorts the economy, etc. Next slide. Okay, Leonard Read, obviously the man, again, take a look at the longevity, defender of the free market. Without Leonard Read, I don't think any of us would be here. Okay, he took over and founded the foundation. Many of us, I often said, got my education there. He was very influential in Detroit. I should mention that. And as I said, Father Steiner, a Jesuit, was on the board of the and was very good friends with Leonard. Leonard certainly, some of his work is readable. The most famous pencil, and it's even referred to in Keynesian books, is iPencil. I read it in the mainstream economics books, and they refer to Leonard Read's iPencil. I've had people tell me they read that, and it gives them a good understanding. So every student of mine not only has to read it, but get tested on it. That's how you make sure they read it. I'll tell you, I was walking down the hall one day, back to two of my students, and one of them turns to the other one and says, "No, I don't read any of this stuff Veryser makes us read." Ha ha ha! I pat him on the shoulder and said, "Hello, who's next week, buddy? You better start reading this. I can read every page. Okay, I'm not going to put up the bed again." Okay, but anyway, his iPencil, probably famous for that. Okay, next slide. Okay, Mark Skousen, we might want to have him sometime to speak. A wonderful man. His book, The Structure of Production, is, I think, the best book published on macroeconomics. Tremendous understanding of it. Mark is in the investment business. He's the Austrian investor, but he also has a Freedom Fund with Freedom Forum out in Las Vegas. And Freedom Fest. I've gone to it a couple times and spoken. Actually, I do the debates. He has me on I always debate the atheist. I'm the Catholic part, and safety is going to go at it. I can't go this year because I've got another speaking engagement, but Mark has done fantastic work. That book, The Structure of Production, is phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Okay, next slide. Okay, Roger Garrison, I know this is still living. He was able to tie in. He teaches at Auburn. He's retired. Now, I kind of bawled him out when I saw him. I said, Roger, I was born in 43. You were born in 44. You're retiring. And I'm teaching at 2 universities and 3 next year. How about getting back into the fight? Okay? I mean, come on. We need the manpower. But his whole concept, he took the Austrian trade cycle theory, he put it into the form of the modern macroeconomics. His book is Time and Value. Superb book. And still teaching, and says a fellow with me at the Mises Institute. Okay, next slide. Okay, Israel Kirzner. I talked to my students who've gone on for PhDs in management and in marketing. They say Kirzner is the guy to read. He was a student of Mises. He taught at New York University, and his work on entrepreneurship is cutting edge. And students are reading it now, and it's a very, very important work that Kirzner has done. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, there are 3 ways you know a good school. They have a record of contributing to the general body of economic thought. What I tried to do in the first part of this is to show you the depth of the Austrian program. This is not something that was just designed. This goes all the way back to Aristotle. It's part of the Western tradition. It's not something new, but it's been developing for probably 2,500 years, concept by concept, etc. So the freedom and the idea of a free economy and limited government is not a new thing. These folks have been at it for a long time. What's the second way you can tell? The predictions. They're able to predict things. Mises was able, this is what Mises predicted the crash in 1929. By the way, Hayek did too. Both of them said it's coming. Okay? He warned that the Soviet Union, he said, don't worry about the Soviet Union, it's going to collapse. They've got a price system, they can't allocate resources, it's over. And I'm now beginning to see that the Soviet Union really was surviving a lot of the United States and the infusions of cash, especially during the equipment during World War II, but even afterwards we were negotiating loans for them. So they were really kind of living off of us in a lot of ways. Mises says this is not good, this is not permanent, it's going away. Okay, I described the bureaucratization of industry. Now I'm from Detroit, and I got to tell you that right now, to develop a car, to bring a new car online, it's $1 billion worth of just handling the regulation. Okay? In other words, what's happening is as government is a bureaucracy, as it extends its fingers into industry, they become bureaucracies, and they become less lobby, less motivated to satisfy the market. He also anticipated the effect of inflation on various income groups. In other words, he said, look, this is the way it's going to happen. And what you're seeing in the economy now is the effect of inflation. Okay? Henry Hazlitt and Joshua F. Predicted the coming of world inflation. They said the Bretton Woods Agreement was flawed. Now, it was better than what we got, but it was flawed, and it was going to come to an end. Frederick Hayek foresaw the crash in 1929 and predicted the end of the Soviet Union and socialist economies. Wilhelm Röpke, we'll talk about him again, anticipated the rise of deficit spending and inflation as a result of the welfare state. And by the way, Röpke, who was very important in reviving Germany, said, look, we're going to revive Europe, but we don't know whether morally it can hold together afterwards. They were very worried that people given prosperity would lose the concept of what they went through to achieve the prosperity and would then undermine it. Next slide. Okay, Mises' prediction on the effects of government is what? Every government meddling with the business of private enterprise results in disastrous consequences. It paralyzes initiative and breeds bureaucratism. The same prediction. Okay, now next slide. Mises prediction, everything, now this is very important, I'm going to give you some charts and graphs on this. Everything that's done by a government against purchasing power of the monetary unit is, under present conditions, done against the middle and working classes of the population. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in two economies, not in one. Okay? We've got two economies going on. One of them is supported by the Federal Reserve, and the other of them is the folks. And the folks are having a rough time. And I can tell you that. They're having a very, very rough time. Let's go through what's happening. Okay? Now, I'm going to point this out. This is the total share of income. This, by the way, was the Census Bureau. It was published by, of all people, Mother Jones. Okay? Now, notice the top two levels of the economy. They're doing very well. They are all in industries supported by the printing press of the Federal Reserve. I mean, what is the Federal Reserve doing? They're injecting money. How are they injecting the money? They're buying stuff. They're buying it from the New York banks and the financial establishment there. And that's why New York and Washington and others, the real estate's going through the ceiling. But because of the inflation, now notice when this starts in that chart, 1971, when Richard Nixon broke the gold standard. And there's a whole, I'm trying to do more research in 71, there's a whole lot of problems that came from that. Now notice what's happened after 71. The bottom three quintiles have lost purchasing power step by step. The real income is stalled. Okay? Mises predicted that. That is what inflation does. In every country that's had inflation, it's a destruction of the middle class. And the rich get richer because they're close to the machine that's cranking out the money. Okay, next slide. Okay, look what's happened to the average household income. The red line represents the top. It goes to 79. Everybody else has been stagnant. This is the Census Bureau, a Congressional Budget Office. Look at the sheriffs in 79. Okay, it's inflation. This is inflation, it's doing it. And it will continue to grow. Okay, next slide. Okay, the top, now who's paying the taxes? The people with the money. Well, the top quintile and the second quintile, they have the money, they're supporting the government. The rest of the folks are seeing their income slip, and therefore their tax contribution is slipping. Next slide. Okay, real inflation adjusted by quintile. This is inflation adjusted mean housing income. Notice the bottom, stagnant. The top growing. Since when? 1971. Okay? Folks, this is the result of inflation. And this character in the White House is talking about things moving in the opposite directions. He's causing it. He and his pals are causing it. By what? Inflation. I don't know if you're supposed to go to the grocery store or the gas station, but it's there. The next slide. Differential prices. Now, what's happening? One of the things that we see with inflation is you got to see where the prices are going up. The prices are going up where the infusion of money is coming in. Okay? Notice listed property. That's risen faster than the CPI index. The bottom line is the CPI. The top line is real estate. Real estate is going up far faster than the CPI. What's next going up? Stock shares. What's next going up? Education. Okay? And the statistics on education is kids, the education system is going crazy with their prices, and kids are going head over heels into debt to keep up, to get jobs that they can't ever pay off. Okay? And so the education is one. Education and medicine are the two areas, and finance are the three areas that have been supported very heavily by government and the infusion of credit. Notice on the line. Okay? You get to 2002, 2003, all of this money is being poured into education. And what's happening on the other side? Increase in cost. Now, I gave a speech at Central Michigan University, and the professor came up to me and he said, Harry, he said, guess how many more students we have than we had in 1971? 42%. How many more faculty do we have? 42%. He said, how many more bureaucrats do we have? I said, 100%? He said, no, 636%. What's happening is this whole thing is becoming a top-heavy mess. It's supported by these idiot accrediting agencies, which are doing nothing but cardinalizing education. I can tell you because I tried to start a college in Michigan. And the cardinalization effects and the money you had to raise, not to teach a student, not to hire a family member, but to get through the bureaucracy. Okay? And this is what's causing the major problem. And where is it coming from? Uncle Sucker. Okay? And so we tell the kids, kids really don't understand what $60,000 to $100,000 debt is. Okay, I've been through that. You know, and they say, well, just sign up, pay a letter, I'll earn enough money. They aren't earning enough money. And now student debt exceeds credit card debt in the United States. This is all due. If you want to stop the student problem, get rid of the accrediting associations. Board up all the higher education bureaucrats in your state, put them to work at something else, and get rid of the student loans. The colleges will compete, prices will come down, they'll still hire the faculty. It is not helping faculty wages. And what will happen is they'll become competitive, and it'll come down, and these kids will be able to pay for it, like I did. I was able to work my way through at a private university. Got a little help from my father, but I had to work for it. Okay, next slide. Compare the prices. Take a look at it. College tuition has increased faster than medical care. At the bottom is the CPI, the next one is medical care, the next one is textbooks, and the next one up is college tuition. You know, when I walk into a class I have to use a textbook, I tell them, I said, look, go on eBay or internet and get the cheapest version of the book. Okay? Because there's nothing changed about foreign trade or the Fed, it's all the same stuff. Why pay $300 or $400 for a book when you can pay 10 cents or 15 cents? We've got to keep these price costs down. And the reason we have to is because they can't get married and have children. Our fertility rate is dropping. And you can't support this thing without young people coming into the economy. We have to have it so that we can strengthen the family again and get back to people who can get out of college, start earning work, and not be held over heels in debt. Only the Austrians get hot and bothered about this. When I'm at UOD, I switched from Walsh to UOD. I told them, I said, look, what you got to do is you got to lower the tuition rate. I'll teach for you at Macomb, half price what you got downtown. I said, I got to be competitive. And I'm not going to put these kids into debt. Now, how about stocks? That is, both charts show you the amount of margin accounts and what's happening in the stock market. People are borrowing money to go into the stock market on the anticipation that they can sell it for more at a price down the road. Now that is a danger. Whenever you buy stuff, because you're going to sell it higher down the road, you're starting a bubble. Okay? And look what's happening since 2006 when they started pumping the money in. It's pushed it right up. And that's not real dollars, those are borrowed dollars. Okay? So that's the danger sign. That's another indication. Okay, next slide. Okay, now the third leg. We did the contributions to theory. We did the predictions. Now we do the success. Does it work? In 1948, Germany was an absolute basket case. And the people who actually pulled it out were the Austrians. A lot of people don't know that. When I was in college, that was ignored. But Ludwig von Mises, an Austrian economist, a good friend of Rebke, good friend of Mises, went into Germany, took over, and pulled it out. And look what happened. Okay? Between that and 1957. In 1957, he was very disappointed. He stayed on as chancellor. Next slide. Okay, this is Erhard. 1897, 1977. He was the economic minister at the time. He was actually German chancellor. He really was disappointed because he wanted to curb the welfare state under Bismarck. And the parliament would not let him. He also didn't exactly want a central bank either. He wanted to follow the Austrian theory. But he stayed on, and he was the master of what's called, his book is The Economics of Success. Okay, next, Rebke, Austrian economist, was his mentor. Both he and Rebke had designed the German economy and the anticipation that Hitler was going to lose the war. And they were, Rebke fortunately was in Turkey. Erhard was there and was hiding out in some ways from the Nazi people. Okay, next slide. Okay, Rebke, he talked about the welfare state. This is in the 60s, 50s. He said the welfare state is going to bring about chronic deficits and inflation. And if you take a look at Europe, what has the welfare state done? Exactly what Rebke said. They're all underwater. And France, by the way, take a look at France, that is going to be a major, major problem that's coming down the road. Because the French people will not accept the austerity that the Germans did. And they think this thing's going to go on. Well, they've been living in a wonderland ever since that revolution. But take a look at France, that is going to be a major problem coming. Okay? Now, the German economic miracle. What did Erhard do? Having the German, the Wirtschaftswunder. Okay? The economy wonder. It was the German economic miracle. Erhard came in using Austrian theory. He returned the German currency to a gold basis, which in that sense was trying to Bretton Woods. He lowered tariff barriers. Now, Germany had been a high protectionist country since Bismarck. He lowered the tariff barriers to 10% across the board. In essence, Germany went in the direction of free trade. They continued to lower tariff barriers. He abolished wage and price controls out the window. He got on the radio and said, it's all over, folks. There's no more wage and price controls. That's it. He lowered taxes and regulation in the German economy. And he privatized public industry. Volkswagen was a public company. The people's car. Who founded it? Adolf Hitler. And he sold it off. And the minute he sold it off, Volkswagen went from a basket case to a relatively prosperous automobile company. Okay, now notice, this is the proof. What happened? Out here we've got 1949. Okay, I'd like to move this, but you can see it. You can see right here, 49. This was German unemployment. Look what happened. Oh, that's great. Good, I want to do this. Now look what happened to German unemployment. This is all through the 50s. They were down below 2% by the time the Austrians were done. This is by 1958. You can see constant falling. And if you take a look at it, the other one is the GDP per capita. And that line is the trend line coming from when they were under the Kaiser and under Bismarck. And actually, by 1948-49, they were exceeding the trend line of economic growth in Germany. Okay? And this is the Austrian case for the success. On the next slide. Now, how did the German economy do vis-a-vis the other economies? Right here is the Deutschmark versus the US dollar. Okay? Strong economies have strong currencies. Notice we were able to hold Bretton Woods, but the minute that Richard Nixon broke Bretton Woods, and by the way, Johnson had his finger in that pie too, look what happened to the US dollar vis-a-vis. It was 4 marks to a dollar, a little bit over 4 marks to a dollar. By 2009, it was below $1.30 per mark, per German mark, okay, or euro. Now, if you take a look on the other side, a lot of people say it was the Marshall Plan. Okay, so if you take a look and you see, this is the gross domestic product of France, Germany, West Germany, and Japan. What is the one line? It's the black line that's outsoaring them all. West Germany. Why? They were using the principles of Austrian economics at that time. And notice the growth rate. In 1970, they went crazy and they elected the socialist regime, and they're still paying for it. But at least the regime came in and told them, look, you've got to be realistic, and that's why Germany has relatively low unemployment now. And Germany has no minimum wage law. There is no minimum wage law in Germany. I'm almost done, so. Jacques Chirac, a Frenchman, He was the advisor to de Gaulle. He tried to restore the gold standard. He knew Bretton Woods, the wheels were coming off the buggy. He was a good friend of Mises. This is the two of them together. Ref wrote one of the best books on monetary theory. It's hard to get. I think Mises is going to republish it, The Monetary System of the West. Ref had a mini, he followed what Erhard did in Germany. He was a good friend of Erhard's, Austrian member of Mont Pelerin Society. And during the time of de Gaulle, he turned the French economy around. Okay? Now, they didn't do quite as well as Germany, but he did turn it around and get a modicum of prosperity. So if we take a look at it, and then I've got an awful lot more in my book, I didn't get into the trade cycle tonight, which is, I have the longest chapter in my book is on the trade cycle, but I wanted to give you the background, because I wanted you to get the optimism and the confidence that we're on the right track. And secondly, I wanted to show you what the Austrians have accomplished. In theory, superb. And on most of your things being taught, Austrian theory. In practice, it works. It works. And in predictions, and many of us had predicted 1999 and 2000 as points that were going to come apart. A lot of my colleagues did, Peter Schiff and others. I was able to do it. A number of others were able to do it. And the Austrian theory is very accurate, and it works. So in any event, I wanted to show you what your founder, Bill Law, was involved in helping get it started. And I met Bill Law when I was a boy. And so I think that the Austrian theory proves itself. Be glad to sign any books that you buy, and I want to thank you for hosting me. I had a great time. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Ryan Law. I'm the president of the forum. So for those of you who do not know me, just want to say I'm absolutely just thrilled today, not only because we've completed another wonderful season of the forum, but we also have confirmed a very big speaker for next year. And I'll go over that at the very end. First of all, I'd like to thank Harry for joining us. That was a wonderful talk, very encouraging, very positive. He'll have his books in the back. I'm sure he will autograph them for you. We also have some pamphlets near the back, and Lone, our executive director, is here, was unavoidably detained. So if you got here before him and you didn't pay, could you please pay him? That would be great, because we're on a tight budget here. We're not super rich. So. But I guess going back to what Aaron said originally in his introduction was it really is all about the young people. We bring in a lot of people from Brookville Academy, some Marquette students. Yuri tonight brought in some Carthage College students. And really that's what it's all about. I grew up, I went to Brookville Academy, very fortunate. And I took economics there under Bruce Roth. He brought us to the Wisconsin Forum when I was probably 16, 17. And I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I'm here today, but well, it's signaling me.
We can hardly hear you. Speak louder.
Okay, I'm gonna bring this up here. But so I remember, hearing Lou Rockwell here, and it changed my life. I remember that, and I was like, go to Lou Rockwell, and I total reversal. I think, oh my gosh, now I get what's happening here. It's not what they're saying on TV. Everything you see on TV is just wrong. But anyway, that's just one idea, one speaker that's been here that can change your life. And all it takes is one kid to get here, and that can change the world. You never know who's going to be here. Maybe it's the next Steve Jobs, maybe it's the next politician, maybe it's the next investment banker that changes everything. You just never know. Looking back at our speakers that we've had, big names, Walter Williams, Milton Friedman was here, right after he won the Nobel Prize. Murray Rothbard, Leonard Reed, a lot of these guys that Harry was talking about, they were all here. Even a lot of them before they got really famous. Baldy Harper, Yuri Maltz has been here a number of times. Tom Woods, Henry Hazlitt, Tom DiLorenzo, Lou Rockwell, John Stossel, Reverend Sirico, Joe Bass, Dr. Ron Paul, who is a really big name, but he's not the big name that we brought in this year. Which brings me to the next point. Next January, we'll be having a big meeting that's going to come here. And I really want to push everyone to be a member. He can't be here in December because what he's going to be doing is climbing the biggest mountain in Antarctica, which will be the last of the biggest mountains on every continent in the world, among many other things, triathlete, super athlete. You may know him. He was on your ballots in 2012 in the presidential section. If you don't know him by now, his name is Gary Johnson. He is the former governor of New Mexico, and he's been on TV quite a bit, big speaker. He knows Tim, and Tim today got a really good deal. We have a verbal commitment in January. We don't know exactly what date it is, but it's a big deal. And we're very happy. So I want to invite you all to be a member next year. The advantages are you get to be here, you get to meet people, you get to network, and if you're a member, you can transfer. If you can't be here for any reason, you can give your membership, that ticket, just to a friend that night or a colleague. It's also priced such that we have 5 speakers a year. If you're a member, you basically get 1 for free. So you basically pay for like 4 speakers, but you get 5 for free. That's how we're pricing it. So we have different price levels. You can talk to me or any member of the board, and we can keep you in and see what you can do. We're a 501c3. Everything beyond the price of meals is fully tax deductible. So we're here for education. Ideas have consequences. I thank you again for making this a wonderful season, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thanks for coming.